Hi, welcome to another class on sexual reproduction in flowering plants. We have already discussed some very important concepts from the chapter along with some important multiple choice questions from those concepts. If you haven't already checked out the previous videos, click on the link above and go through those videos. Today we'll start the class with some important questions. So firstly, we'll try to solve some assertion reason questions from the topic which we covered in the last video, that is pollination. So the first question which you can see over here, getonogamy is genetically similar to autogamy. That's what the assertion says. And the reason says that the pollen grain come from the same plant. Now, if you remember, getonogamy is the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of another flower but of the same plant. So question number 55, what do you think the correct answer is? The assertion is true and the pollen grain comes from the same plant. That's the reason, which is also true and is correctly explaining the assertion. So the correct answer to this question is both assertion and reason are true and reason is the correct explanation of assertion. Question number 56. Assertion says Clistogamous flowers produce a short seed set in the absence of pollinators. I hope you remember the two types of flowers. One is Clistogamous and the other is Chasmogamous. Clistogamous flowers, they do not bloom and they do not expose their reproductive parts, while that of Chasmogamous flowers, they bloom and they do expose their reproductive parts. So Clistogamous flowers, they are actually those which are not exposing their reproductive parts and hence they do not need any pollinator. So our assertion is a true statement. These flowers do not open at all. This is also a true statement and is correctly explaining the assertion, which is that Clistogamous flowers, they will give a short seed set even in the absence of pollinators. So question number 56, the correct answer is A. Moving on to question number 57. An angiosperm flower represents the modified condensed shoot which performs the function of sexual reproduction. This is a true statement, isn't it? But let's read the reason. The fertile leaves of the shoot become modified into microsporophylls and megasporophylls, which bear ovules and anthers respectively. Now, if you pay attention to this statement, the microsporophylls should give rise to the anthers and the megasporophylls should give rise to the ovule. But over here, the things are just mentioned as opposites. So we have to consider this as a false statement, right? So among the four options over here, your correct answer will be option C, which is assertion is true but reason is false. Let's move to question number 58. Hydrophily. Hydrophily is that mode of pollination where the plants get pollinated by water, all right? So, which we discussed in the last video, and I told you that hydrophily is one of the rarest form of pollination. All right, so moving on to question number 58. Hydrophily is the major mode of pollination in most of the aquatic plants in angiosperms. This is a false statement since the major mode of pollination is entomophily. In case of angiosperms, the major mode of pollination is entomophily. Alright, so the assertion is false, but the reason says almost all the aquatic dicot and monocot plants require water for transport of male gametes and for fertilization. This is again a false statement. So our answer becomes option D, where both assertion and reason are false. Moving to question number 59. Assertion says xenogamy is pollination between two flowers on different plants. This is a correct correct statement. Xenogamy is the other name for cross-pollination, and the reason says pollination between two flowers on the same plant is autogamy. This is a false statement, because autogamy is when pollination takes place within the same flower. Pollination between two flowers of the same plant can be termed as geitonogamy. So this answer should be option C. Assertion is true, but reason is false. Question number 60 says, assertion says anemophilous flowers or anemophilous plants have to produce enormous quantities of pollen. Do you remember anemophily? It is when pollination takes place with the help of wind. So they do have to produce enormous quantities of pollen. So this is a true statement. And the reason says because during the transit of pollen through a wind, a considerable amount of pollen is lost. So this is absolutely correctly explained why the anemophilous plants require enormous quantities of pollen. So the correct answer will be both assertion and reason are true, and reason is correctly explaining the assertion. Question number 61 says, if pollen mother cells have 42 chromosomes, the pollen has only 21 chromosomes. Okay, this is a true statement, because the pollen mother cell, or you can also consider them as the megaspore mother cells, they are diploid and they do undergo meiosis to ultimately form the pollens, which have half the number of chromosomes. So from 42 it will reduce down to 21. Pollens are formed after meiosis in the pollen mother cell. This is exactly why it is diploid in the pollen mother cell, and the chromosome number is haploid in the pollen. So this is also a true statement and is correctly explaining our assertion. So the answer will be option A. Moving to question number 62. 62 says, in the microsporangium, the tapetal cells possess little cytoplasm and are generally having a single prominent nucleus. Okay, but this statement is incorrect. Do you remember about the layers of the anther? The outermost is the epidermis, then you have the endothecium, then the middle layers, and the tapetum. The tapetum provides nutrition, isn't it? And those cells are usually binucleated or multinucleated in nature. So our assertion is false, and if the assertion is false, there is a high chance that the reason will also be false. But still, let's go through the statement once. During microsporogenesis, the microspore mother cells undergo mitotic division to produce microspore tetrad. This is correct. This is incorrect, because it is meiosis which takes place. So our reason also becomes false. So the correct answer to this question will be option D. Let us now start with the next topic, which is pollen-pistil interaction. Now, we have already studied about pollination. So you know that in pollination, the pollen gets transferred from the anther of a flower to the stigma, right? So right after the landing of the pollen grain on the stigma, till the pollen tube enters into the ovule, everything is considered under pollen-pistil interaction. So on pollination, the pollen will fall on the stigma, and then the pollen tube formation will take place and will ultimately reach the ovule. So if you remember the structure of a carpel or a pistil, this is your ovary, this is your style, and you have the stigma over here, right? And this is the ovule. Inside the ovule, the embryo sac will be present, and the embryo sac will have the ovum along with the synergids at the micropyle, the antipodal cells at the chalazal end, and the polar nuclei in a fused state forming the central cell. I hope you remember these things. Now, once pollination has taken place, let me draw a pollen grain. So a pollen grain has fallen on the stigma. So the time when the pollen grain lands on the stigma, then a pollen tube formation will take place, and ultimately the pollen tube will carry the male gametes into the ovule or embryo sac and help in the transfer of the male gametes. So everything from the landing of the pollen grain on the stigma till the pollen tube enters into the ovule, everything is considered under pollen pistil interaction. Now, how does exactly this interaction take place? It takes place with the help of some chemicals which are secreted by the plant, by these parts of the plant, so that the compatibility of the pollen grains are determined. So suppose if a pollen grain falls on the stigma but it is not compatible with that particular flower, the pollen tube formation will either not take place, or even if the pollen tube grows into the style, it will be destroyed. So this pollen should be compatible with that of the pistil, otherwise the pollen tube, either the pollen tube formation will not take place, or even if the pollen tube formation starts, it will get destroyed within the style of the flower. Now, in majority of the cases, the pollen grains are shed at the two-celled condition. You remember the names of the two cells. The first one is the vegetative cell and the second one is the generative cell. In majority of the cases, in approximately 60% of the angiosperms, the pollen grains are released in the two-celled stages. Right? Now, in this condition, what happens? The generative cell will ultimately divide again by the process of mitosis and will produce the two male gametes. So once the generative cell has divided, the two male gametes will be present within the pollen tube. All right, but in 40% of the angiosperms, this was only in 60% of the angiosperms, but in rest of the 40% of the angiosperms, the pollens are already shed at the three-celled condition, where the pollen tubes will be carrying the two male gametes and eventually will help in the transfer of the male gametes within the embryo sac when it will enter the embryo sac through the micropylar end. All right, and the synergids which are present at the micropylar end, they have the filiform apparatus, which not only helps to derive nutrition from the nucellar cells over here, they not only help to absorb nutrition from the nucellar cells, but also helps in the delivery of the male gametes within the embryo sac. So filiform apparatus have a very, very important role in transferring the male gametes within the embryo sac. All right. Okay. Now, in this diagram, which is taken from our NCERT, you can understand that here are the male gametes, and the first male gamete will enter with the help of the filiform apparatus and will be released within the embryo sac. The first male gamete will go and fertilize the ovum to perform the process of syngamy and will eventually give rise to the zygote. The second male gamete will go and fuse. Second male gamete will go and fuse with the polar nuclei and will form a triploid structure, which will give rise to the endosperm. The function of endosperm is to provide nutrition to the developing embryo. Now, this whole process of pollen pistil interaction is important to us because it helps us in hybridization or forming crops or plants according to our preferences. Right now, how exactly do we carry on with the process of artificial hybridization? Now, there are some terms which are important in this particular topic, and they are highlighted with red color. So the first term which you need to remember is emasculation. Now, what is emasculation? When you artificially remove the stamen of a flower. Right, when you remove the stamens of a flower before its maturity, when we remove the stamens of a flower artificially, then it is termed as emasculation. Why are we doing this? Why are we removing the male part of the flower? Why are we removing the stamens? from a bisexual flower. We are removing the stamens because we don't want it to self-pollinate. We want to perform cross-pollination. We want to perform xenogamy. We don't want the flowers to perform self-pollination. So we remove the anthers, we remove the stamen before they reach maturity by the process of emasculation. Right now, after emasculation has taken place, we cover up the plant with a bag, because we don't want any foreign pollen, something which we don't want the pollen of any undesirable plant to fertilize or to pollinate our plant, right? So once the flowers have been emasculated, a bag of a suitable size is taken and is used to cover up the flower, especially the stigma, because we don't want the plant to get pollinated by some unwanted pollens, right? So this is the second step, and when we just cover up the plant with the help of a bag, usually a paper bag, and the second step is known as bagging. All right, because we are actually just waiting for the female part of the flower, that is the stigma, to reach maturity. As soon as the stigma reaches maturity, the pollens from your desirable plants can be dusted on this particular plant, and again they are covered up with the bag. So that's the third step, which is known as rebagging, because you don't want any kind of contamination by some unwanted pollen. All right, so these are the three steps under artificial hybridization. The first one is emasculation. You're removing the anther to prevent self-pollination and to permit cross-pollination. The second step is bagging, where you are covering up the plant with a paper bag, because you don't want it to get contaminated with some unwanted pollen. And finally, the third step is rebagging, when what you do is, when the stigma reaches maturity, you dust the you remove this particular bag where you bagged it to prevent any contamination. So you remove that bag and you dust some pollen on your plant, and these pollens are from that of a desired plant body. So these are dusted onto the original plant and then rebagged again, and then covered up with another paper bag, so that the seeds can develop and you get your desirable hybrid. All right, now we just saw that the first male gamete will fertilize the ovum, and the second male gamete will fuse up with the polar nuclei to form a triploid structure, and the triploid structure will ultimately give rise to endosperm. What is endosperm? It's a nutritive tissue which provides nourishment to the developing embryo. Now, sometimes the endosperm may be completely consumed by the developing embryo as it matures, and examples of those seeds are beans, peas, where you actually cannot see the endosperm anymore. The fleshy part of the peas which you see, suppose if this is the pea, the fleshy part which you see is actually the cotyledons. The endosperm is absolutely used up by the developing embryo before it matures, so we are not able to make out the endosperm anymore. But in some plants like rice, in some plants like castor, you will be able to see the endosperm, and it may persist in a mature seed and are used up when the seeds will germinate. All right, so examples of those plants where endosperm is present in the seed condition are castor and coconut. Now everyone must have seen a tender coconut, right? And we also drink the water out of a tender coconut. It's very nutritious and it's very tasty as well. And it quenches our thirst on a very hot sunny day, isn't it? So yeah, so the water which you drink is actually the endosperm which is present in the coconut fruit, right? So, I mean, actually the coconut seed. Okay, so the endosperm, when it divides in a free nuclear form. Now the meaning of the word free nuclear is that only the nucleus divides primarily, and after a certain point of time the cell wall formation will take place and the endosperm will gradually become cellular, but in the beginning it's just the nucleus which will divide, and then eventually the cell wall formation will take place and the cellular endosperms will be formed. So once the cell wall formation has taken place, the cellular endosperm will be formed, right? But before the cell wall formation, the nuclei will divide, and such kind of division where cell wall formation is taking place later on, it is known as free nuclear division. So the coconut water from the tender coconut is actually the free nuclear endosperm, but gradually when the cellular endosperm, like the cell wall formation will take place and then the cellular endosperm will be formed, that's actually the white kernel, which you can usually see even in a dried up coconut. Now if you compare a tender green coconut with a brown dried up coconut, you will understand that the amount of water also decreases. In a tender coconut, the amount or the volume of water is much more compared to that of the brown coconut, isn't it? Also the white kernel in a tender coconut is much more thinner compared to the brown coconut which you see, which has much thicker white kernel. That's because the cellular endosperm has formed to a greater degree, or a much thicker cellular endosperm has formed compared to that of a tender coconut. All right, now all of these points which we are talking about, these are all true for angiosperms. Okay, these are all true for angiosperms, but sometimes I've seen questions about endosperm in gymnosperms. Please remember that in gymnosperms the endosperm is a haploid structure. It's a haploid structure and it is formed before fertilization. It's formed before fertilization, and it's a haploid structure and it consists of only maternal genetic information. It does not have any information from the male gametes. It just has the information from the maternal plant body, and it's a haploid structure formed before fertilization. So there is a difference between the angiosperms and the gymnosperms. Endosperm, the endosperm of gymnosperm is haploid while that of angiosperm is diploid. In gymnosperm the endosperm is formed before fertilization, but in angiosperms the endosperm is formed after fertilization. Next we move on to embryo formation. Now the formation of embryo takes place in dicot as well as in monocot plants. We have already studied about double fertilization, which is a characteristic feature in angiosperms without any exception. So you know, when the first male gamete fuses with the ovum, it will form the zygote. So the zygote is formed after fertilization. Now soon after the formation of zygote, please remember the structure of ovule. I hope everyone remembers the structure of ovule. This is the micropylar end. We will consider this as the micropylar end, where we have the synergids and the ovum. On the chalosyl end you have three cells which are known as antipodal cells. Each one of them are haploid. And in the middle you have two polar nuclei in a fused state, which is known as the central cell. Now once the pollen tube has released the male gametes, So let me draw the pollen tube over here. Inside the pollen tube you have the male gametes. The first one will go and fertilize with the ovum, and the second one will go and fuse with the central cell. So when the first male gamete fuses, it forms the zygote, right? And this zygote is a single cell right now. This zygote is a single cell right now. Now this zygote will eventually divide by the process of mitosis to form two cells. Okay, so one cell which is towards the micropyle, let us suppose this is the micropyle. So the cell which is present towards the micropyle, it will be termed as the basal cell, and the cell which is present on the opposite side, that is the chalazal end, that will be termed as the terminal cell. Okay, so the cell after the formation of zygote, the zygote will divide by mitosis to produce two cells. Okay, so this is the first cell, this is the second cell. The first cell which is present towards the micropylar end is considered as the basal cell, or termed as the basal cell, and the one which is towards the chalazal end, it will be termed as the terminal cell. Right? Now the basal cell will ultimately give rise to something which is known as the suspensor. It will give rise to suspensor. So this is the suspensor. It will eventually give rise to the suspensor, and the terminal cell will give rise to the embryo. So let's see how exactly will the suspensor and the embryo form. So let me draw it over here. So after the process of fertilization, you have the zygote which is formed. In the zygote you have the basal cell which is present towards the micropyle, and you have the terminal cell which is present towards the chalazal end, or towards the antipodal cells. Now remember, you have the triploid structure which is formed due to the second fusion of the male gamete, right, with the central cell. So a whole lot of endosperm formation has already started, right? So a whole lot of endosperm formation has already started. And remember, endosperm is the nutritive tissue. So the developing embryo will receive food, nutrition from the endosperm tissue. All right. Okay. Now, how exactly does the suspensor grow, right? So let me show you how exactly will the suspensor grow. So this is your ovule, embryo sac. So you have your terminal cell. Let's draw the terminal cell like this for the time being. But the basal cell will divide and will form a structure like this, which is known as the suspensor. And let me draw the terminal cell with some other color. Let me draw it with green. The terminal cell, let's draw the terminal cell in green to differentiate. So the terminal cell will divide by mitosis and will form, first it will form a globular structure like this, which will divide further to form a heart-shaped structure like this, right? So first a globular structure will be formed, which will eventually divide again to form a heart-shaped structure. Okay, so this is the suspensor, and this is your embryo. Now can you guess the function of suspensor? Can anyone guess the function of suspensor? The suspensor is actually pushing the developing embryo into the endosperm tissue so that the embryo can derive its nutrition, right? Because this part is your endosperm tissue, which will actually provide nutrition to the developing embryo, isn't it? So the suspensor, the function of suspensor is to push the embryo into the endosperm tissue so that it can derive its nutrition. Okay, now when a globular, a round shaped embryo is formed, then it is termed, can be termed as a proembryo. So first a globular shaped embryo will be formed, and then a heart shaped embryo will be formed, and then eventually the division of the embryo continues, and it forms the two cotyledons which are present within the dicot plant. I mean the dicot seed, and only one cotyledon in case of monocot seed. So let me use green. Yeah, so first your globular embryo will be formed, gradually a heart-shaped embryo will be formed, and then eventually the two cotyledons will be formed like this. So this one on your right hand side will bend like this, and this one will also be formed like this. Okay, let me rub it out, otherwise. So it will eventually form the two cotyledons, right? So it will eventually form the two cotyledons. So this part will be termed as the plumule, which will give rise to the shoot system, and the suspensor gives rise to the radicle, which eventually will give rise to the root system. So you might think that why are these cotyledons bent like this, or why exactly do the cotyledons bent? Because see, this ovule is not a very big space, right? So the growth of the embryo is taking place within a very small embryo sac, so they don't have enough space to grow straight, and that is why they bent in this manner to fit the two cotyledons of a dicot embryo, right? So the suspensor divides to give rise to the radicle. Radicle is something which will give rise to the root system, and the embryo cell enlarges, divides repeatedly to form the two cotyledons and the plumule in case of dicot plants, and only one cotyledon in case of monocot plants. Now let's quickly see the structure of a dicot embryo. So see, you are able to see, you will find similarities with the structure we drew in the last slide, isn't it? So you can see the plumule, you can make out the plumule. These are the two cotyledons, this one and yeah, this one is the first cotyledon, this one is the second cotyledon. You can make out the cotyledons, isn't it? So the dicot embryo, they have an embryonal axis and two cotyledons. Okay, so the embryonal axis, the part of the embryo which is above the embryonal axis, is known as the epicotyle. So this part can be termed as epicotyle, and the part of the embryonal axis below, it is known as the hypocotyle. So portion of the embryonal axis above the cotyledon, it is known as the epicotyle, and the portion which is below is known as the hypocotyle. The epicotyle, it terminates in the plumule, and the plumule is the part which will give rise to the shoot system of the plant body. The hypocotyle terminates in the radicle, which will give rise to the root system of the plant body. Next we move on to the structure of a monocot embryo. Now remember, in a monocot embryo there will be only one cotyledon which is present. The cotyledon is termed as scutellum. In a monocot embryo, the cotyledon is termed as scutellum. Now at the lower portion of the scutellum, which is a portion of the embryonal axis, it has the radicle, right? And again the radicle which will give rise to the root system, but it is covered by a protective covering over here. Okay, so the radicle is covered by a protective covering which is known as coleorhiza, right? Now the portion of the embryonal axis above the level of scutellum, that is termed as epicotyle, and the epicotyle is protected by the coleoptile. All right. The coleoptile is the structure which keeps the plumule protected in case of monocot embryo, and coleorhiza is the structure which keeps the radicle protected in case of a monocot embryo. Please remember that coleorhiza and coleoptile, these are the structures which are present only in a monocot embryo. They are absent in a dicot embryo. Coleorhiza is absent in dicot embryo, and coleoptile is also absent in dicot embryo. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll continue with the chapter in the next class, and we'll take up some very important assertion reason questions and multiple choice questions which will help you in solving the questions in any kind of competitive examination as well as your CBSE or boards examination. Please like and share this video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe to Biology for Life, and for more of such colorful videos. Thank you. Bye.